second grade. One of the hardest and coolest things about math is when you get to solve word problems. Word problems are awesome because they help you with real life math. Math is something that you can use every single day, and it's usually unlikely for a math problem in real life to just be 15 plus 7. Usually there's some type of situation or word problem. Word problems are awesome for real life, and we're going to watch today what different types of word problems you might see.
What types of word problems will you see in second grade? There are 3 key types of story problems: start, change, result, part, whole, and comparison. And we're going to talk about all 3 of them today. Let's start with start, change, result. So this is a type of problem where you start with a group, then you change that group and end with a new group or a new version of that group called the result. Now this type of story problem has 2 subtypes: add to and take from. I've also seen them called join and separate. So let's take a look at an example. Let's say that you start with some marbles, and then you found some more marbles. The key word here is found because it's something that you're doing. Now, do you think that this is an add to or a take from? Well, if you couldn't answer right away, no worries. You could ask yourself 2 questions, or you could ask your student 2 questions. Are you adding to the group that you began with, or are you taking from the group that you began with? Since we found more marbles and we were adding more marbles to how many we had in the beginning, this is an add to type of word problem. An example of a take from word problem, or for this scenario, is if you lost your marbles. Okay, now part, whole. Here we also have 2 subtypes. The first one is where we start with some groups called the parts, and we're trying to find the total. So we're taking these groups, putting them together to find the total. So this is called a put together type of story problem. The other scenario is where you are given the total, or you start with the total, and then you need to find the parts or the groups. And this is called a take apart type of problem because you are taking apart the total into its groups or categories or whatever you're trying to do. Now, the main difference between these 2 is that the put together type of problem, the story asks you for the total. You'll see it in the question. How many are there all together? How many are there in total? Something like that. For the take apart type of problem, the problem will actually give you the total in the beginning with a number. It'll say there are this many altogether, and they'll be asking you for one of the parts in the question. Now let's take an example. You are given the number of fruit and the number of apples in a basket, and you need to find the number of bananas. Now you know you need to find the number of bananas because in the question it will ask you how many bananas are there in the basket. So do you think that the bananas represent the total or one of the groups or parts? Well, let's think about the different categories that we're dealing with, or different groups, sorry. We're dealing with apples, bananas, and fruit. Which of these groups do you think stands for the total? Now, among these, usually the total will be a more generic term, like fruit, since fruit would represent both apples and bananas in a basket. Also, the apples are a type of fruit, and so are the bananas. So here, the fruit are the total. And since we're looking for the bananas, that must mean that the bananas are one of the parts or the groups. So this is considered a take apart story problem. See how I broke that down with specific, just by asking simple questions? Now the last type of story problem is called a comparison problem. This is where you start with some groups, usually only 2 groups in second grade, and then you need to compare those groups. Now this one's a little bit easier, and this should pop out easier to you than any of the other types of story problems because there are some key words that you can look for. Here's just a couple of them. The most common ones are more than, less than, fewer than. Let me give you an example of a sentence that you might see. May has more than Shay. The dog is larger than the cat. The car is longer than the desk. Those are just some examples. Now, just to recap, there are 3 key types: Start, change, result, part, whole, and comparison.